Hey, what's going on? Welcome back. I needed to make a stitching pony for some leather projects I have coming up. I've been needing one for a while. I've been kind of making do with clamping some things down, but this is a much better solution. Let me show you how I did it. I started off by measuring the width of my lap. You'll see a little later on why I did this. Then I started taking the rough white oak and cutting the pieces to size. I measured what was a good height when I was sitting, but again, I'll explain more about that later in this video. The lumber was pretty flat already, so I just sent it through the planer a few times and then got one straight edge on the joiner. After that, I took it to the table saw and ripped all of my strips to the same width. Back at the miter saw, I started cutting some of the 45-degree angles for the pieces that would make up the jaw. For the outside jaw pieces, I just needed one 45-degree angle. For the inside jaw pieces, I needed to cut two 45-degree angles parallel to each other. You can see here how it's all going to go together. I started by gluing two small spacers together that go at the bottom of the jaws. Then, I glued on the inner jaw pieces to the outside ones. I used some large steel weights to clamp them down while the glue dried. Then I marked out halfway and found a spot I would like to drill through for the bolt later. I glued the spacer pieces to the base, cleaning up the glue squeeze out with a straw. I used a 1/8 inch roundover bit on my surfaces to make them a little easier to handle. I glued the stationary part of the jaw to the spacer and the base. Next, it was on to making a wooden knob. This was the first time I had made a knob, so I was really interested to try it out. I started by tracing a circle with a compass. Then, taking the radius of the circle, I placed the point of the compass on one spot in the circle. I intersected the circle in two spots. Then, placed my compass on one of those intersections and kept marking this way all the way around the circle until it had divided up into equal parts. I used my center punch to make marks at those spots and then drilled them out on the drill press. Once I drilled those all of the way through, I took it to the bandsaw to cut out the original circle. I didn't like how sharp the grooves were on this first one, so I tried something different. I used the same circle as before, but then drew a slightly larger circle around that. I made the radius the same as before and marked where the intersections were in much the same manner. Then I used a larger drill bit to drill them out. I used the larger of the two circles as my drill spots. The result was a much more sweeping curve and one that I felt easier on my hand after I cut it out on the bandsaw. I used my belt sander to refine it. I wanted to recess a nut into the other jaw piece to accept the bolt. I'm not good at this type of chisel work, but I'm trying to do more of it and I'm getting better at it. I used some 5-minute epoxy to secure the nut into the jaw piece as well as the bolt into the wooden knob I made. Then, I heated up the cured epoxy a little and used a chisel to scrape away the excess. I first saw my buddy Johnny Builds do this and it works pretty well. Next, I had to cut off the excess bolt. I bought it way too long, but I was glad I had plenty to work with. Then, I just used a file to clean up the threads a bit and remove the burr. I wanted to create a shim so that I could have the jaws open pretty wide but not have to crank the knob too much. I marked the center on another piece and cut it out on the bandsaw. I had to sand the inside of the jaws a bit to ensure that they clamped properly, but it was worth taking the time in this step. Then I moved on to shaping the jaws. I didn't want these harsh angular lines, I wanted something a little more organic looking, so I used a block plane, a rasp, and a random orbit sander to refine the shape. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I used a few screws up through the bottom to help secure the upright parts. Then, I attached the hinge to the other side of the jaw. I took the shim piece to my laser since it seemed like the good spot for my logo. Then, it was time for a bit of hand sanding. I added some leather to the jaws, and I marked the rough dimension and cut them out. Then, I used some contact cement on both the leather pieces and the jaws of the stitching pony. Once it had gotten tacky after about 10 minutes, I stuck the leather to the jaws and clamped it down for a while. Then I came back and trimmed off the excess leather. All that was left was finish at this point. I went with the Mahoney's walnut oil again on this project, and I love how it makes this white oak look. Thank you for watching. I really like how this thing turned out, and I plan on using it a good bit on some leather projects. I'm not very good at leatherworking yet, but I would like to do more with it. That's kind of the reason I made this. It has a feature that I'm really proud of. I wanted to be able to open the jaws wider without having to unscrew this a whole lot. So I made this nice looking shim that just comes out, and then the jaws can open pretty wide, pretty much wider than I think I would ever need for leatherworking. And then without having to crank it down so much, I just put the shim back in there and secure it. Easy. A stitching pony is important because it allows you to use both hands while you're working on something. Often when you're doing a saddle stitch, you're going in from both sides with 2 different needles, and it's kind of difficult to do if you're having to like hold the piece and feed it. This should make me more proficient once I get a little better at it. One of the reasons I made this is I have a project coming up that needs some leather work involved in it, and I'm not done with that project yet, but whenever I am, if you're watching this the day that it's released, it's not out yet, but I will link to a video of that project that I used this on. And so if you happen to be watching this after the day that it's released, you'll be able to check that out too. Let me know below if you have any questions about this, or if you have done any leather work. I'm always looking to learn. Thanks so much. I'll see you real soon. My neighbor is revving his 4-wheeler right now. Of course, the 5 minutes that I decided to record. So